Glancing out my back door window, I could tell that the sky was gray and the air was crisp and cold. A slight sense of uneasiness filled my mind as I zipped up my coat and reached for my Cleveland Browns ski hat. Spinning the hat between my hands, I searched for the small white patch that had been sewn to its brim. Before I could locate the patch, however, I noticed that the little orange pom-pom that had rested on top of the hat was now barely attached. Sadly, after several winters of relentless wear and tear, the ball was now dangling by one small, fraying piece of orange yarn. Disappointed with my hat, but anxious to get going, I ripped the orange pom-pom off the top of the hat and jammed it hastily into my right coat pocket. My mother, in the room adjacent to me, had noticed my somewhat covert attempt to slip out the back door undetected. With an obvious tone of suspicion in her voice, she reminded me not to be late for supper. "Oh, okay," I mumbled as I quickly pulled my gloves over my hands and pulled the door shut behind me. Taking a few preliminary steps from the back door, I paused to make sure I had not forgotten anything. When I was convinced I had everything I needed, I walked through the red fence that surrounded the backyard of my house. I remember the snow crunching under my feet as I trudged my way toward the creek at the furthest edge of our property. The creek that bordered our property was a tributary of the Cuyahoga River. On average, it was only about 1 or 2 feet deep and approximately 5 to 6 feet wide. Its length, approximately 100 miles of sharp twists and turns that over time had cut a 10-foot V-shaped notch through the southern edge of my small suburban town. In the spring, summer, and fall, the creek was a popular hangout. My brothers and I would spend entire days playing near the water with various other kids from the neighborhood. But when winter came, however, the creek was transformed into an empty, frozen, and lifeless cavern. The creek bed would freeze, and the steep snow-covered banks made it extremely difficult to climb out once you had climbed in. So naturally, during the winter months, we usually avoided the creek area altogether. We would opt instead to stay occupied indoors. From time to time, we would play outside on our street, enjoying the occasional snowball fight or pickup game of football. Except for once or twice every winter, I, along with my brothers and various neighborhood friends, would walk the frozen creek bed as far as we could. It was a marathon of sorts that throughout my earlier years had become somewhat of a tradition. Typically, our expeditions would last from early morning until late evening, ending only when we were too cold or too tired to go any further. Earlier that winter, I had decided to embark on an expedition of my own. Even though I was very young, very small, and not particularly brave, I was, for some unknown reason, anxious to test myself. I still don't completely understand why. Looking back on it now, I believe it may have been an experiment of some kind, perhaps born of some inner desire to truly discover and exercise my own individuality, to fully experience personal autonomy, to see if I could, in fact, exist outside the bubble of comfortable familiarity. After a couple of weeks of mental preparation and the 500-yard trek across my yard, I found myself at the edge of the deep ravine. I paused for a moment, looking back at my now distant house, the soft glow of yellow light coming from its windows seemed remarkably warm against the dark and cloudy sky, its promise of warmth and security beckoning to me. Home. 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 Wrestling with self-doubt and determination, I paused briefly. I was, for reasons too complex to explain, saddened, the gravity of doubt whispering through my mind. Turning back is still an option, I thought to myself, as my eyes scanned the steep slope that tapered down to the snow-dusted ice below me. The moment of truth had arrived, and it was simply time for me to decide. I took one more brief look back at my house to make sure that the coast was clear, and shaking off my fear and doubt, I slid down the steep and snowy bank of the creek and landed gracefully on the thick ice. I picked myself up and brushed the powdery snow from my red nylon snow pants. Lifting my head and regaining my composure, I immediately noticed the sheer beauty of the undisturbed snow and ice that shrouded the V-shaped banks in a bright white stillness and desolate silence. The atmosphere was both haunting and fascinating to me. I laughed to myself with nervous exhilaration, and then I started to walk. This is Mike Bostwick, your host, from Pipe Choir Records, the place where all of your dreams can come true. Signing off for now. And remember, folks, if you want to keep what you've got, you got to give it away. Take it easy.